And thanks everybody for joining our conversation about where we are with Core Web Vitals and what's next. I'm pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Dave Smart, who is the creator of TameTheBots.com. He has been an entrepreneur in the tech SEO and web development space for 25 years, and like me, is a big nerd for crawling, indexing, and rendering. um, Dave has recently published a guide on FCP and LCP for soft navigation within single page applications, and has also built custom tech SEO tools, including a new tool which you just recently announced to visualize Core Web Vitals history, and
Yeah,
of
fairly
course, a number
recent,
of
yeah.
tools, that I use, such as your robots.txt testing tool, your knowledge graph API tool. So um, advancing the profession for us and building the things that we need.
Oh, I'm just glad someone's enjoying using them. That's always great fun, isn't it? So,
You say that now, but then when I email you and I found a bug,
yeah. No, I don't know, Anne. Who's this Anne?
who's this girl?
Who's-
Awesome. So we're going to be covering some of the biggest questions that we get at Lumar regarding site speed and getting performance fixes implemented as an SEO. And then we'll talk about, of course, the headline, the newest Core Web Vital metric, and the future of Core Web Vitals and site speed and performance implementation. Dave, did you want to say a few words about our plans for today?
yeah, just like that. It'd just be nice to have a bit of chat, see where we come from. Core Web Vitals feel new, but they've been around for since about 2019 now. So, and always were intended to be something that grew and changed. So it's good to have a bit of a chat.
I think that that's a very positive outlook. No panic in
No
in
panic.
in your voice there. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are going to talk about getting stakeholder buy-in. That's definitely one of the barriers that I think has come up the most in the last, we were talking about it. It seems crazy, but since it was announced that Core Web Vital was going to be a ranking factor and where we are today, it's almost been 5 years, and a lot has changed in the way that it has been perceived. And so I think if we are going to talk about where we are with Core Web Vitals and what's next, we have to start with how to get stakeholder buy-in to get implementation, since the idea that Core Web Vitals is a ranking factor that's going to significantly differentiate did not come to pass. As well as then pivoting to some more technical implementation and diagnostic and tooling. So really running the gamut. A couple of quick housekeeping details. We do have the closed captions and the live transcript options enabled in Zoom for you. And in addition, we are recording this webinar as always, and we add a curated transcript and distribute that to all registered participants after the fact. We do have both the chat option and the Q&A option. If you have a formal question you'd like me to pose to Dave after we get through the prepared remarks, please go ahead and pop that in there and we'll get through as many as possible. So don't sleep on this opportunity to have live one-on-one Q&A with our expert. And at the end, if you can stick around just 1 minute and fill out our feedback form, we really do take that to heart. If you have any feedback about the format or the content and subjects, we want to make sure this program continues to be useful for you if you're taking an hour out of your day out to learn with us. So we
Yes,
wanted to get started with a quick poll just to get a pulse check on everyone who's here today. The first one is, are you tracking Core Web Vitals? Are you monitoring where your site is in terms of Core Web Vitals? Agnostic of tools or tooling, are you tracking? As someone who likes to fill out forms, this is always the hardest part, waiting because we don't get to vote.
we're not allowed to vote, are we? this is unfair. This is suppression. That's heartening to know.
Yeah. Is this what you expected? A little different?
A little. I'd say it's probably more than I expected. Our tracking, definitely.
Excellent. Let's see where we are with the second question then. So phase two, if you are tracking, what are you using? Are you using RUM data, field data, your own collection of RUM? I think this is going to be really telling.
Definitely, yeah.
All right, everybody get your votes in.
Okay, it's pretty even mix.
Holy cow, 36% of you are collecting your old field data.
This is also it's quite surprisingly higher than I'd probably expect, and good stuff.
So maybe you guys should be leading this webinar.
Yeah, but we'll go.
Definitely don't hesitate to chime in with your experiences and make use of that chat to share with each other what you've learned and seen, as well as posing any questions for Dave. Excellent. So let's dive in and get started. So
Okay.
the first subject we wanted to talk about is, as I teased at the beginning, the big story with Core Web Vitals was that it was sort of much ado about nothing as a ranking factor. So how has the messaging that you're delivering to clients or to others in the industry changed about Core Web Vitals and the impact on SEO?
Yeah. Well, like Slade says, it's very little, but there's always a caveat to that. So we can't all just go very little. Let's all go home now. We'll keep chatting. But I mean, the big story was, that it was going to be a ranking factor, and everyone kind of hooked onto that. And I do think there's been maybe a little bit of confused messaging, particularly from Google. It's been a little bit flip flop. It started out, it's going to be a ranking signal, although a small one, to it's a really small one and just a tiebreaker, to now it's not really a ranking system or signal on its own. It's kind of in something else. As part of the page experiencing. So I think they've very much walked back a little bit from the initial thing, maybe in messaging. I don't think that was necessarily intentional. I think really we as SEOs are always desperate for something that's a clear yes and no, because so little in SEO is. So when you've got this nice little, oh, good, bad, no, all right, it's a very clear metric, and it's very easy for something to jump on. Very easy to report on. And so I think maybe some people made more of it then, because it was such a clear metric in a field where there's not always very clear metrics. And I think we, maybe as SEOs in the community, perhaps overhyped it a little, but from the wrong kind of aspect, from a ranking aspect. I think that's basically kind of where we've come from. And I think really it is now a case of, from an SEO kind of point of view, like I said, if you've got all poor scores, everything's in red, then maybe that's something that's worth prioritizing a little bit more in terms of ranking. Because if you're really poor and really bad, I think it's a lot more effect than if you're in needs improvement, or particularly if you're green. And if you're already green, then I don't think there's really going to be any noticeable impact for most people to make it a little bit more green. So if you're at 2 seconds and you're just bringing it down to 1.5, I don't think that's going to shoot you up the metrics much in terms of ranking. So it's kind of more a tiebreaker kind of situation, particularly for things like that as well. They're very relative. So if everyone you're competing with is roughly even, you both put a lot of effort into your site, it's relevant, it's got good content, people are linking to you, and there needs to be a decider. It could be that decider. And in hyper competitive fields where there's a lot of competitors that are all doing mostly the right things, then it then becomes a lot more important. But for a lot of people, it kind of doesn't. and it's hard, you can oversell it. So you could likely say, does it really? It doesn't really matter. It does, but like I say, it matters in different places. Maybe just a pure ranking, to places that I know this is impacting rankings, and some SEOs kind of operate that way, and that's where their involvement ends, and it's passed on to other teams. But I think this should be a more holistic view, for your client's site and in general, and it does matter in different places. Things like conversions and rating, things like that.
I think it's interesting the way that you point some of the finger at SEOs for overhyping core web vitals. I certainly learned to not trust the initial rollout of a new metric or potential signal,
Yeah,
and to finesse a little bit more. But I think the biggest takeaway is that because the strength of improving or passing core web vitals as a potential ranking factor did not actually bear fruit, it can be difficult for an SEO to point to a KPI as the rationale for investing resources in fixing core web vitals. So
yeah, very much so.
if the impact is outside of organic traffic, outside of positions, and is instead felt more in the brand impression and the conversion rate. Can you talk about how an SEO who's isolated from those teams, web analytics, conversion rate
Yeah,
optimization,
yeah,
how can you motivate those teams to feel a sense of shared ownership over core web vitals?
yeah. And I think that's one thing that SEOs particularly do have an opportunity in. It's interesting. It was kind of lumped into our corner in some ways. Some might feel it's forced in, but very often an SEO's role in an organization, or even if you're consulting for them, is kind of not in any one of those teams. You're not necessarily all in product, or you're not in develop dev, you're not, necessarily in the C-suite in product, in marketing. But what you are is interacting with these different areas. Maybe like they perhaps don't quite so much, products and dev will perhaps talk, but they won't talk to the C-suite and things. So you've got a great opportunity there, to be in, to be that central point of contact and to bring people together and to start mentioning, you can say to the conversion people, hey, look, we can bring you traffic, but it's not going to convert, that's no good. Or, the designer people who are saying, oh, my design's beautiful. Why are people, they say, well, we can bring you traffic, but they're all going to go and bounce. So they're not going to see your beautiful but slow design, or things like that. And you have great opportunity to sort of bring those teams together in that respect, because you can talk a little bit of each of the language from the aspect of what you're doing. Overseeing core web vitals, you can see it. You're perhaps monitoring it, and not some of the other teams aren't. We've got things like Search Console that it's in your face, and we're seeing this stuff where maybe some of the others
Mhm.
aren't looking at that kind of thing. And it's always good to come and bring, despite the fact of saying, don't hype it. In some ways, it's also a good thing to say, hey, look, Google have got this thing, and people go, oh, Google, yeah, Google. And and it can even be a good icebreaker if you don't have good relations with the dev in the team, or you don't have good relations with the UX team, or you don't talk to the C-suite or something. It can be your icebreaker to actually get into those teams and create something, and a bit more unity and a bit more of a working relationship where perhaps maybe you didn't have, because you've got something factual you can go in with and actually talk to these teams.
I'd be interested to hear from those folks who said they have some sort of custom data collection, or they've implemented collecting their own RUM data to see whether, I'm assuming that there was some sort of dev resources in play to get that data collection method, so that there may be more appetite to consume the data that's collected. I'd be interested to hear how folks are having success or not in taking whether these pre-baked reports in Google Search Console, or the the pre-baked dashboards in Crux, or your custom dashboards, and as Dave suggested, presenting that as a tool to support the work of other teams to get Core Web Vitals prioritized. I think that's a really good segue to the next segment about stakeholder buy-in.
Yeah,
Another main thread, I think, for all of us who have been paying attention to Core Web Vitals as a theme is one of barriers to implementation. You've already touched on the fact that um, SEOs began as the owners of this because of the way it was announced and because we have access to and visibility into the tools. We can see that big red line. Um, but different business units may be misaligned on priorities. So, what's your secret to getting stakeholder buy-in for these improvements?
really, the first thing is be realistic, as the slide says. Like you say, obviously, our role as SEOs is usually involved, get something higher in Google. But if you go charging in saying, "Oh well, if we spend all these dev resources on this, we're gonna rule," and you're not necessarily going to do that. So I think it's is be realistic about it, saying, "Look, this is a problem, but this is not the kind of problem that's going to make you rank, go from page 5 to 1." And if you try and sell it on that and it doesn't happen, you're going to have a bit of egg on your face. Your credibility is not going to be great. And they'll go, none of this is worth bothering with, because they'll see something like you'll improve. You're suddenly getting greens everywhere. The needle doesn't go up. And I think there is a softer edge. There's not a direct ranking signal. There is a softer edge to this ranking part of it, that you're creating a great experience. You put this effort in, just like some other things. Like tuning some of your content. Sometimes is a ranking factor. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you've got to wait for that feedback loop of all these users are now satisfied of using your site. Start creating those signals. Start linking to you. Start speaking about your site well. And that's a little bit of a softer kind of thing. But if you've rushed in and sold it on rankings first, then the stakeholders are not going to really sit and wait for that. Whereas if you can point to other areas where there can be immediate improvements, then you're probably going to get more buy-in to continue with the work that you're doing, trying to improve your core web vitals.
A subtle message, but something I think we always need to
Yeah,
reinforce. So, talk
yeah.
about the the suggestion you make that having folks actually experience the bad experience
This is it,
is
because
also
so
helpful.
it is helpful as well, because this is kind of some way out of SEO. But yeah, show them how bad it is. If the site really is bad and it's getting poor scores, sit down the stakeholder. I know it's not always super easy to get the time, but very generally, particularly things like the C-suite, they've got the latest flagship phone and device, powerful laptops are sat in their office with the gigabit internet and everything. So maybe they actually have no concept of the service that they are giving to some of their users. So you can use things like DevTools and simulate a slow mobile device, or you can even just get, one of the greatest things is go buy the cheapest Android device that you can possibly find at your local, big brand, Walmart style thing, or Argos or something, and have a really bad, slow old device and go, this is what some of your customers are getting. I mean, sure, some maybe luxury high-end brands and they think that their users aren't on those, and they might be surprised. And that's where you can talk to your analytics team. It's where you can talk to various stakeholders that would have that kind of information about what kind of devices are people actually viewing my site on, because often it's very different to what people might think. They might design and thinking that all their users have already arrived and have the iPhone 22 Pro Super Max or whatever, but it might actually not be the case. Even some luxury brands are aspirational, and customers will generally not maybe have such a great device. Maybe they have an older audience, and once again, older audiences maybe aren't so interested in upgrading to the latest, greatest device. So if you actually sit them down and show them the pain, show them, look at this thing, it's slow. I've hammering at the buy button and nothing's happening, or it's jumping all around the screen. And they may have never experienced that. They may have never thought to sit and do that. So it's an important thing to try and make them at least walk a mile, or at least browse a mile in some other people's shoes.
I love this suggestion. I know I have a pretty middle of the range phone. I don't have the latest Samsung, but I'm not too far off of it. And I live in a region where we have 5G, but if I am at a trailhead, you can forget it, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
in addition to emulating what a lower end device with a lower CPU might experience when you're trying
Yeah,
to discover a brand's website for the first time or do a quick checkout, I think also simulating spotty network connection, it may be something more tangible that
yeah,
our stakeholders may have experienced themselves, but having that frustrating experience on your own website may be the difference to saying, okay, I want to fix this.
yeah, exactly.
So, Core Web Vitals has advanced the tooling for the SEO profession. It's advanced personally, in my experience, my vocabulary as an SEO. I know a lot more about the back end of a site and the decisions that are made that result in a slow experience that may, at their first glance, not seem like relevant to SEO at all. Um,
Yeah,
and yet, collecting data or making sense of and interpreting the data so that we can translate that into a set of actions that are most likely to be worth the squeeze is still a challenge for many. So let's talk a little bit about your ideal approach to data collection for Core Web Vitals.
yeah. I mean, obviously, first you have to collect them. You have to be getting them. It was so great to see in the poll that so many actually are at least getting some, particularly with rum. I mean, obviously, the ideal collection is rum. It's field data or real user metrics or rum or YAR rum if you're a pirate. And it's just, because that's what actually people are having. Lab data is not to be frowned on always, so it definitely has its use, particularly when you're um, collecting, when you're testing, you're iterating, you're trying to see if something's changing because it's instant feedback. And it's kind of, if you're using the same service, it's kind of a sterile thing. So you can actually see if what you're doing is making the difference, as opposed to, there's a lot of other factors and a lot of feedback loop time from the other stuff. Obviously, there's kind of a free level that's out there called Crux, which is the Chrome User Experience Report. This is information that Google collects through the Chrome browser, not yet on iPhone, unfortunately. But and there's a few other little things they have to be signed in, they have to be syncing, and it's just a sample. It is important to monitor that because that's ultimately what search uses. So we are SEOs. That's the bit that's going to wind up in Search Console, and that's the bit that is going to play the factor in the ranking one. It's free. It's already done. You don't have to do anything, but coverage is going to be an issue, even for the big sites. There's only a selection that you need a certain amount of traffic to get into that. I think it's normally somewhere around about 8 million of the origins, so that's 8 billion domains that have got some data, but that's a fraction of what's on the internet. And even a big site's going to have huge tracks of it that actually don't have URL level data. You're only getting origin data. So you're only getting a little bit of a sniff about what's going on. And particularly as it turns up in Search Console, you're only getting it sort of narrowed down to mobile, desktop. That's it. Otherwise, it's the rest of the, everything else is included, including all over the world. So, it's not always that thing. So definitely, I think worth collecting your own real user metrics. You can gather more because you're getting everything as long as it's a browser, it's a device. Although if you've got a big site, you will probably still want to sample that down. You won't want everything if you're getting millions because you're just drowning data. So, if you've got a mediumly, fairly busy site, then just gather it away. As soon as it gets busier, maybe you want to sample that down a little bit. If it's very, very quiet, you're only getting 1-2 clicks, beware because that's very noisy data. But it is more effort to gather your own, although there are some third-party services that can do this mostly for you. And there are things out there. Google provide a Web Vitals script that helps you to do that.
So this is something as we were preparing for today that I think is going to be very useful for our audience. The idea that once we get beyond the selection of which forms of data and the caveats in terms of signal versus noise and sample size and utility, um, even just looking at core web vitals as a green, yellow, and red signal,
Yeah.
if our goal has been collectively, we want to pass and then we're going to feel good about ourselves,
Yeah.
looking under the hood and saying, actually, that may not be the entire story. So I'm keen
Yeah.
to hear your notes on this.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, obviously, core web vitals are recommended that you measure them at the 75th percentile. And basically, what that means is you line up everything and you throw away the worst quarter of people, and your score is that. So, that's perfectly sensible. It's a great thing. I'm not bashing the 75th percentile at all. There has to be a cutoff point, and that's quite a sensible one. And then you get in those metrics back, go, oh yes, I'm passing, I'm passing, I'm passing. Oh, this is brilliant. But it might not be the full story because you're throwing away that 25%. That's a quarter of your visitors who could potentially be getting really bad scores. So it's often good to break that down a little bit further. The core web vitals are available when you get in from the API. You get heuristics, so you can get basically the distribution, and you can break it down into how many are getting good, how many are getting needs improvement, and how many are getting poor. And it's often worth a look at that. That once you're on top of it and you've got to green, that this is great. That's probably already better than a lot of people are doing out there. But if you really want to take it a little bit further, then you could start to have a look like, well, hold on a minute. Why are nearly quarter of my things, this particular example on there, we've kind of got most green, then a little bit of, and needs improvement, a little poor. But that could be all poor. And that could be because you're having users say, for example, you sell expensive parts for combine harvesters that are millions of pounds machines and stuff, and your engineer's out in the field and he's going around on his spotty connection on the mobile phone in the middle of a field somewhere, desperately looking where he can get the part to repair this thing, and he's getting a really poor experience. But you've just looked at the green because everybody who's brown is in the office and stuff who don't bring, maybe they'll be involved in the purchase, but they're not the ones that are out there actually doing it. And it could be that it's actually your customer, your most valued customers are in that little tranche that aren't doing so well. So it's often worth breaking it down and having a look. Firstly, is it a fairly even spread? You're always going to get some that are poor. It's an imperfect system. It's the internet. Sometimes it's going to be bad, But if you're getting a huge tranche, or maybe you're doing something for them, maybe you're popping something up for some people, for even a fifth of your people, which could still be a huge amount of people. That's really annoying and popping stuff up and down. But most people don't get that. Maybe it's your logged in users. Maybe it's this certain section, and it's a very blunt tool. The 75th percentile. It's a very handy thing. There has to be some point we cut off, but there's more stories that the data can tell if you've got the time and you can dig.
Fantastic. I think it's brilliant the way that you've painted a very detailed user story. Potentially that could be attached to a lost transaction value of the
Exactly.
kinds of things that could be hidden in that failing or not
Yeah.
passing 25%. For those teams represented today and within our client bases that are relying solely on lab data tools and the sort of pre-baked Core Web Vitals reports in Search Console or the Crux dashboards, I frequently get questions that suggest there is a lack of basic understanding of statistics.
Yeah.
So, an example is I very frequently hear, why did my scores go down when nothing in the code has changed, right? So then we have to start talking in detail, as you did, about the limitations to this data set
Yeah.
and the
Exactly.
ways that device mix or traffic mix can change, even if the code base hasn't, and then that would mean that your metrics go down. So
Yeah.
I bring that up because your argument here is very compelling that we need to look beyond just passing to see what other poor experiences are hidden in that forgotten 25% of
Yeah,
experiences. Do you
exactly.
find that you have to get into talking about research methodology and statistics in order to get folks to dive into the
Yeah,
remainder?
I think you do. Yeah, and particularly one of the big ones, particularly that you see, I think a lot of people don't understand maybe, is the nature of percentiles and that 4 week span. So that means you can fix something now, and data starts coming in after you've made the fix, but nothing changes with your metrics if you're collecting over those 28 days because you're looking at the 75th percentile. It can actually remain really, really bad right until it drops. So it's not like if you did an average, you would see a nice slope down. But because you're looking at the 75th percentile, it's still bad. It's still bad because you're chucking out those quarter of bad ones, and then suddenly, boom, it'll go down, and then and boom. And it can even be that you fix something, and it even goes up a little bit for a week or two because of the nature of how percentiles work. And I think that's really hard to sort of talk to people. Whereas if you break it down in a different way, if you start, although you shouldn't use it, if you can say, well, look, the average is going down, or even if you look at who's fallen into what bracket, that will show positive movements probably way before your 75th does. So, doing things like that and trying to educate people, like you say, a little bit like that is kind of really important. Probably not always the easiest thing to explain. Sometimes it's good if they've got a great analytics team to go and talk to them because they probably know a little bit more, about statistics, and maybe they can help, think. And even just creating some simple reporting, where, line goes down, line goes up. It makes a compelling story to put in front of somebody whose job isn't to understand the 75th percentile because they've got plenty else on their plate.
I find in that case too, those are very valuable suggestions. Thank you. One other idea I have is to go back to that, put that tangible experience in front of them. So take an affected URL and do some mock-ups using lab data tools of how the experience has ameliorated to show
Yeah,
that tangible gain or that tangible decline, to give a little bit of story to the
yeah,
statistics,
that's right.
for those that you are losing when you start to talk about data limitations. Uh, I think we've covered this one. So let's hop on to the technical aspects of your remarks. We want to talk about, of course, the reason that Core Web Vitals may be newly on our radar, which is because we finally had a new metric rollout and it's fully replaced one of the originals, first input delay. So first of all,
Yeah.
can you catch us up on interaction to next paint?
Yeah, by FID and hello INP. So FID was first input delay, and INP stands for input next paint. So FID, which we first had, was only caught a fraction of the interactions that a user would have with the site. It was only the first, and it was only how quickly that site was ready to listen to your click. So you'd load a site, and it's ready to click. It will listen now when I'll click a button, which is certainly better than nothing, but it misses so much because that's not how people, particularly even right from an e-commerce site, you have many more interactions. You start, dropping down lists, you start popping up pictures, you start, selecting sizes, then you start adding carts, right up to things that, full web app experiences where there could be quite some, interaction with what you're doing with the site. So INP measures the whole life cycle of a page. So all the time you're on it, on a URL, kind of like CLS does, because CLS has done that for a long time. Obviously, we've got LCP first thing, it was initial load metric. FID was almost an initial load in thing because it was just the first one. So you could click something, it could listen, but then it could be an absolute dog afterwards. It could, take forever to actually do something. So it's measuring how long it is until it starts giving feedback, and it can start to listen to something, and the user knows that something is happening. It doesn't mean everything needs to be done because some things can't be done instantly. Some things are long processes, and it doesn't mean that you have to abandon your entire web app that goes off and, I don't know, converts a video or does something that is always going to be a lengthy process. But what it does mean is that you shouldn't leave your users hanging. You should be giving them some visual clues that something's happening. You should be breaking that up. So, maybe if they want to abandon that or go off and do something else instead, then it will do that. It won't just hang. So it's a lot tougher metric to pass because of that, because FID was basically almost de facto. Everyone passed it. You had to almost be doing something really strange, really heavy, not to pass FID. I think it was something like 96, 97% of sites were passing it, even when it came out and Crux first rolled out, which is a huge tranche of people. And IMPs, a lot lower amount of people are passing it off the bat. And there are definitely a lot more challenges to it. It's a lot more technical. FID in its own way was technical, but most people weren't that fussed because most people are passing it. But it's definitely one that you're going to need to make friends with your devs with a little bit to some extent to be able to get on top of. And definitely I would get people to, encourage people to go and read about it if they're not sure about it. The web dev stuff is excellent resources about what it is. So, you could have a real good deep dive about the ins and outs of exactly how it's measured. Because basically it's taking the longest in the time frame and a little bit of trickery, but basically that's what it's for. It measures the worst interaction someone's had.
Is there a new technique or approach to site speed optimization that you've had to upskill on in a way to keep pace with IMP that you didn't before? Because as you said, most sites weren't failing for first input delay, and so you didn't have to
Yeah,
really learn too much about the
yeah,
thread and the response
exactly.
timings or the way that your site treats when there's a hanging response.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting you said it's the main thread. I think people have to become a lot more, certainly from a dev side and, from suggesting, have to become a lot more interested in what the main thread is. Basically, for those who don't know, a browser runs JavaScript on the main thread, as they call it, which is what you're looking at. That's also responsible for layouts and for listening to your clicking and stuff. So if you fill that up with loads of things that are taking a long time to run, um, you've got heavy JavaScript functions that are running. And bear in mind that might not only be your stuff that you've put in there. If you're loading in tons of tracking pixels and third-party resources, that all counts. That all by default runs on the main thread. So you've got all these things that are going on at the same time, and that can lead to the browser not being able to report back because it's busy doing that. It's busy trying to run all these things. It's not reporting back that something's happening. It's not listening to you, trying to cancel that or go on off and do something else instead. So it really has made you think about what you're running on a page, both in terms of third party and in what order, and how big a chunk you're asking it to do at the same time. So rather than oh well, I just I've got this function that will take an input, upload a file, save it to the database, maybe do something else, then tell the user, thank you, it's been done. All while it's doing that, it's running that one big function. Maybe you should break that into littler parts. And then maybe there's some more advanced things as well you could do about how you order that and how you can make those run, not so they may run, so they still run fast for a user, but that they're not blocking stuff. So that sometimes it's worth shaving, a little bit off a thing and split into a few different things, which might even take a few microseconds overall to run. But because you're presenting those in bite-sized pieces and informing the user on the way, it feels more interactive, it feels faster, and it's a smoother experience for them overall. But yeah, it's quite a change. And although in some ways some of those approaches were things that you needed to do for FID, it's a lot more apparent for IMP. And you need to think about the whole visit and the whole journey, not just a bang, there you are. You need to think about everything that's happening.
It sounds to me like if an SEO hasn't already started to leverage the data to have those conversations with stakeholders and other teams, whether it's the C-suite or the UX designer teams, the web analytics teams, that this is the time to do it and go on that learning journey together around how
Yeah,
do we understand the main thread and
yeah,
how do we pinpoint the experiences throughout the journey towards transaction that
exactly.
are causing us to fail so that we can go collectively to the engineering team and say,
Yeah,
we want to take issue with how you've implemented this, or we've
yeah.
noticed a conflict between the way that you've fulfilled our business objectives and other tools that we have running on the page. Can you help us resolve these conflicts?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also important to remember that it's, it's kind of, there is conflict or we have an issue with how you've done that. You also need to understand from their side, it could be perfectly rational that well, our job as the dev is to get this bit of information saved in our database as quickly as we can. So you might be asking them to do something that at first maybe seems a little counterintuitive to that. Like, well, why would we break it all up into little bits? Surely more little bits is worse. So I think a little understanding as well when you communicate with the devs is that, it isn't an insane thing that they've done. It's not necessarily, just broken. It's just that there are different approaches is, very, very important as well.
Like that. Okay, so we've got a couple of more technical elements to go into, and then we'll
Yeah.
pivot to Q&A. So folks, if you haven't already thrown your questions in, please get them in. There are two other newer mechanisms or
Yeah.
pre-existing mechanisms that are gaining prominence, and BF Cache, and then
Yeah.
an update to the way that Core Web Vitals is going to be measured for single page applications. Can you bring us up to speed
Exactly.
on those?
Yeah, I mean, the backward forward cache is something that's kind of been prevalent in Firefox and in Safari for a while, and it's not really that new, but it's relatively new to Chrome and Chromium browsers, and folks are now noticing because it's having quite an impact on core web vital metrics. Basically, what it is there's caching that people are normally used to your website caches, but what it does do is it creates almost a snapshot, including state. So even if your JavaScript's run on a page and everything's happened, if they go forward and they go back, it's basically instant reloads that little snapshot in time. So you're going to get really good LCP because it's going to be basically nothing. You're going to get great even things like IMP, it can help with because it's loading back to the state. You're not going to do it all again. So it's really worth making sure that your site's working with this if possible. There's a test you can do in DevTools. If you open your DevTools up and go to application, you can test whether BF cache works. Basically, it'll flick you forward and backwards quite quickly and see if it was indeed restored from there. There are a few things that you can do, and you have to watch out sometimes for third-party services can do things on load, and they can do document writes, and they can do window opener, and there are a few little things that will block it from working, and it's really important to try and do so. One of the things that was quite disturbing at one point would block it from working if you had a PWA that could be installed. Just the very fact that you had that and that might pop up and ask you to install would block the BF cache. Unfortunately, now with newer versions of Chrome, they fixed that, so that's no longer a blocker, which is great because it's to the point where you can decide, well, do I want this BF cache? Do I want my site to be a PWA? Which is actually better. Now you can have both. So this is a marvelous thing. Definitely worth doing because it's normally a relatively low effort thing. Most things can be relatively easily worked around if you're already failing it. And then it's just free performance, basically. And this is one that I'm particularly excited about is soft navigations are finally being taken into account. So it's still in beta at the minute. It's not out yet. It's behind an Origin trial. If you want to run it for yourself, you can go and sign up for the Origin trial. But basically, sites involve client-side navigation. So all your SPAs, and it can include a lot of very popular frameworks like Next and Nuxt and SvelteKit and all these sites that start off as an SSR but then become a single page application. Right now, the most core web vital metrics, including crux, including what goes up in your ranking, and including nearly all the systems that you've got for collecting RUM data, only collect the landing page. So if I've got an SPA and I go to the landing, I land on a page, I'll get the LCP for that. I might get an AMP for that. I might get CLS for that. But then as I browse through the site, everything's one session because you haven't navigated from one page to another. You've not done a hard navigation. So everything, so imagine your CLS then becomes your entire journey from landing on category to product to adding to cart to going to the cart. And it's this huge thing, and it makes it really hard to go, well, actually, where is this CLS? Where is this IMP coming from? Because it's this whole massive journey throughout the whole thing. So with this new trial that's coming out and the new things that they're doing, they will now see these soft navigations when you change route. So when I'm going from category to product to cart, it will be the same almost as you have on a multi-page application on an ordinary site as it was. So then you can actually see, is this thing great? And it's also finally helps you finally answer some of those questions that, do soft navigations improve performance? Because a lot of SPAs are sold on that. A lot of SPAs say you pay the expense up front when they're landing. When I go to page B, I don't have to load everything again. I'm only loading a little bit of information and then rejigging the page. Should be in theory faster. Is that true? And this is finally going to be able to give us some of those metrics to find out. Not all the metrics are available yet. Some things like FCP, LCP aren't in there yet, but some others aren't. There are some good reasons for that, apparently, but we'll find out if they can actually bring those to us as well ongoing. And once again, I would definitely go and read up about the soft notifications experiment to find out more about how you can start tracking those yourself, sign up for the Origin trials. The Web Vitals library from Google that they offer for free does support that. I think I've seen a couple of the vendors that do RUM data collection give you the option to start supporting that, but with a preference, particularly things like Next, Nuxt, and these kind of sites. I think a lot might be surprised quite how blind they are to a lot of their experiences, and this will unlock a lot of that information.
So it sounds like you do need to opt in to the beta if you want to be eligible.
So
And
far, yeah.
uh, it would be a good idea if this applies to you to go to your RUM data solution to see if they've opted into the new libraries.
Correct, yes, if they can support that.
Is
Yeah.
there anything, um, are there any types of soft navigations or specific implementations of soft navigations that won't be eligible as it's currently being set up?
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously still in beta. I can imagine there'll be some things and some frameworks that navigate in such a way that the browser heuristics can't actually identify that has been a true navigation. There could be things where you're doing partial things where you're loading different things within maybe part of a site. So you're not quite going from one page to another, but you're very much nearly. So there are still going to be some blind spots. You could almost do there by start getting quite complex with tracking, timestamps and seeing what's what and trying to subtract this from that. But it's going to get hella complex if you do that. So, there will be, areas where there's perhaps blindness, and the only way to really find that out is go give it a try, go and see if it works.
I'm excited to do that as soon as we get off today. So thank you for uh, drumming the beating the drum on the fact that this is a new data source that's possible for sites that didn't have visibility before,
yeah,
and that now is the time to find out whether we're eligible and what that data is going to start looking like, and to give
exactly.
feedback to make sure
Yes.
that if aspects in the data are missing, now's the time to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, easy to send feedback now before it actually winds up in your search console causing you aggro.
So we have one more quick poll, and then I'll move to a couple of questions that came in for you, Dave. So if you want to grab
Okay, good.
a sip of water.
Why not? Yeah.
So we do have a large team that offers demos in the Lumar platform. If you haven't had an experience before with our enterprise crawler, and you want to do so, please avail yourself of that opportunity. If you are interested and vote so today, then we'll follow up with you directly for that. As you can imagine, Dave, there's been a lot of questions. Folks are really keen
Okay,
on your remarks today. So I will
that's good.
curate a couple of them given that we are running close to time. Okay. Just so folks are aware, there have been a couple of specific questions on optimizing for IMP, and that's not what we're covering today. So I'm sorry to
Yeah,
disappoint, but I know Dave said go ahead and take a look at the documentation on
I will
web.dev.
do. Yeah, very quickly though, I'd say just make sure if you're going to have a search and try and look up about yield to main, and also for collecting data, there's a new API coming out called Loaf. But it's not because they're mad because they want to call it low AF. But go and have a look at those. But yeah, it is probably beyond the scope of a few minutes questions. Yeah,
So Rich had this question. We have business cases for improving page load times for the conversion rate and for customer satisfaction. What are some good business cases for SEO? There was some really fruitful examples shared in the chat around things like drop in call-ins to your customer support line.
yeah.
Can you think of it, beyond we're going to see our rankings for this page go up, or we're going to outrank a competitor in this competitive term? Are there any business cases from the SEO team to put behind an investment in Core Web Vitals?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great one. With customer services is an excellent one. If people are not yelling at you that your site's rubbish, this is good. Also, that comes not only from customer service, that comes from what people are talking about you when you're seeing brand mentions, when you're seeing people linking to you. Are they saying, unfortunately, people don't go, oh, this is a brilliant product, and hey, what a great site too much. But sometimes they do. They'll mention it if it's a very bad site, it's a great product. So maybe, just having a look at what people are saying about the brand and kind of about the site and monitoring that. That's sometimes worth doing.
Like a net promoter score or a review sentiment?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I like that one. Okay, so a little bit more of a data question, and then we'll wrap up for today. If you're using a tool like PageSpeed Insights, the Core Web Vitals results that we see there, are
Yeah.
they a snapshot in the moment or an aggregation of the last 28 days?
You're seeing potentially both. It comes in two parts. It comes at the top, will be the 28-day rolling average. So if you've got field data, that'll be at the first bit. It'll call it field data, and that's over 28 days. And it's the 75th percentile of all the visits that are eligible to get into Crux over those 28 days. And then underneath, you'll get a different scores, and that's lab data, and that's a snapshot of how it loaded right there and then for that particular testing instance.
And you mentioned too earlier when you were talking about the limitations of that tool that it is important to look at whether you're getting URL level data in the crux
Yeah,
section or origin level data.
absolutely. Yeah, it's easy to trip on that, and you're hyperfixated. Why is this one page saying it's got bad CLS on the top? And it's not. It's just most of the rest of your site's got bad CLS, but you're getting origin data. So yeah.
Fantastic. We couldn't get to all of the questions, but I think that you've shared so many actionable pieces of advice, and I'm so grateful for the time you took to prepare for us today, Dave, and just for
It's
the
been fun.
opportunity to interact with you more directly rather than just sending in bug reports.
Keep the book reports coming. We like them.
Um, Maybe if you put a bounty.
Like a chocolate bar, yeah,
Yeah,
or
I'll
maybe
take
that's
it.
just yeah. Okay,
I'll take it. You have those Cadbury bars over on your side of the pond.
there you go.
We have to go to specialty shops to get those here. So I just wanted to point out for folks who haven't had enough that Rich, the head of PS at Lumar, is doing another webinar through the Search Engine Journal tomorrow on holistic website health. And of course, we have a blog on the Lumar website with tips and tricks. And I think pretty popular was our roundup on the latest Women in Tech SEO conference, and a shameless plug for Tame the Bots. Um, as Dave mentioned, he's really interested in the what's rolling out for soft navigation. And so you've got a write up there that I want to point everyone to. Thank you everyone for attending, and please fill out that quick feedback form if you're still here, and look for the recording and the sum up in your inboxes.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great to talk to you all.